Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in gaming, how they work, and why we love them. I am Muxl.
I'm Gerg.
And we are coming at you 2 weeks away from our previous podcast. Last week we played Perfect Dark, and put that up for you all to see and listen to. And this week we are going to be talking about collectibles.
I'm super excited for this, actually. This came out of the fact that Mark's been playing a lot of Hat in Time, which is just literally just a love letter to collectathons. And I just finished, yesterday?
Yeah, you said yesterday.
I literally finished the Arkham Knight collectathon in terms of the Riddler's stuff, which I 100%ed in Asylum and Arkham City, so Arkham Knight's the last one. But finally finished that yesterday, so we were both just kind of on collectible mode. And wanted to think more about what made good ones and what made bad ones. And specifically for me, I grew up it's weird, I grew up playing, my gaming history was, PlayStation, so, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and then into, Sly Cooper, and Jak and Daxter, and Ratchet and Clank. And then in the PS3 era, I played, more action-adventure games, like Uncharted, and Batman, and Darksiders. And now in PS4, I'm basically doing the same thing. But point is, I actually really rarely, until really the PS3 era, I wouldn't 100% games, at all. I wouldn't do all the collectathon stuff that was in there. Some I would, and it's interesting to think about which ones I did and which ones I didn't, and why those are, and we'll get to that as we talk about what makes good collectathons good and bad ones bad. But first, let's define collectibles, because there's actually does require some delineation between the different ways that games can require you to gather a lot of things. There's actually a decent number of... We have to be specific about what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, games have you acquire lots of things, right? And they're not all collectibles. So in this case, a collectible, the other two rules might have some exceptions. The biggest thing is that there has to be a reward for collecting the thing, right? So if you just amass a bunch of cheese in Skyrim, you don't get anything for that. If you could go find every cheese wheel there is, and right. I think it would be really funny to show your friends, but the game's not going to give you anything. It's not a collectible.
Right.
Just because you can collect it does not mean it is a collectible.
Yes. That's a good way to say it. I think even just in terms of if the game keeps track of it for you, and you can get a blank out of blank counter to fill up.
Yeah.
That's pretty much a collectible. Mm-hmm. They also need to be finite. You made a good point. The other big one would be currency versus collectibles, right? You wouldn't call the gold in Skyrim collectibles, or the souls in God of War series, the Red Souls. Those would be collectible because you spend those on upgrades, and you can farm them technically, right? You can just go back to areas and kill enemies and get more. And it's probably slow, but you can still do it.
The inability, you can't farm collectibles,
right?
They're not collectibles at that point.
Right, and usually the point of them is to have some extrinsic motivation for collecting them. And spoiler, I guess. For us, outside of a game that is specifically a collectathon, where literally the whole game is based around just collecting things, a lot of times you'll have collectible side quests added on to games, and I think in general those don't work quite as well. I think the closer it is to a collectathon, or something that's basically a platformer where the main mechanic of the game is to get places and find things, then that integrates better with a collectible kind of marathon, as opposed to a game where, say, this is one issue with the Arkham series, which I love to death, obviously, but one reason the Riddler side quest is usually not looked upon too well is because finding stuff and exploration actually doesn't tend to be a huge part of the game. The main mechanics that really take well to the game are traversal, our combat, and our stealth, the Predator missions. And finding Riddler things gets away from you don't have to do almost any of those to find the Riddler's stuff. So it really does feel like a separate thing that isn't quite integrated in the game. Anyway, all of that is to say, the point is, with a collectible, you should have some level of being able to get all of them will reward you with something in game, not just filling up a meter. Those do exist, and again, if the game's good enough and fun enough, you might do it anyway.
Right.
But in general, I think for me, particularly, and this might just be a personal thing, but having some in-game reward to getting everything, particularly the really hard ones, and giving yourself something really cool at the end of it, really gives a reason to keep on going. And I think, again, when I was talking about earlier which games I did that for and which I didn't, the ones that I did tended to have a something, a light at the end of the tunnel that would let me play with.
Well, going deeper into like collectathons and games where collecting is pretty important. So the genre of collectathons is obviously pretty. It was a lot bigger, honestly, than it is now.
Right.
So I grew up playing a whole lot of collectathons. Nintendo, because they're usually narrative light, they tend to lean a bit more on the collection mechanic.
That's true. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, and we'll continue to talk about that. But one of the sort of the two main classes of collectibles inside of collectathons, or you have the thing that you're collecting in order to just progress in the game, because again, collection is the game, and then you've got ones that you're just sort of collecting, to unlock some bonus content. They could unlock, some like a place where you can listen to the game's music or something like that. You might unlock different skins. There's like a lot of different things that collectibles might tie into.
Right.
But what do you think makes a good reward for collectibles?
Well, that's interesting because, especially with the older games, I was just thinking about this. So the reward for getting everything 100%ing Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage, is you upgrade your normal little fire breath. In Spyro, you have just a little spurt of fire that comes out. Have you played Spyro?
Yeah.
To something that happens sometimes. It's an upgrade in the game where you can go through a little area and you'll get a limited amount of time to launch fireballs that go straight and are basically like rockets. You turn into a little mini rocket launcher.
Interesting.
And if you 100% the game, you can permanently turn your fire breath into the fireballs.
Okay.
And so that's awesome to get to go around the game after that and go around and just murder stuff. Now there isn't too much longevity to that. Anything to God mode, we've talked about this before in the cast. Whenever you make something too easy, then there's not too much. But it is it's basically like a cheat or an Easter egg sort of thing.
Right.
Or a cheat. It's not an Easter egg. It's more a cheat, more unlocking something that you had to earn. And I think I love games that do that, where you unlock cheats that way, or get some upgrade to your character way outside game-breakingly, right? Because once you've gotten everything in the game, then you're done with the game, kind of. So it doesn't care how good you are at doing the stuff. Right? You're not. You're not bringing any rules. Now you can just kind of play in the world with a cheat unlocked.
Right.
And so games Spyro does that. To a small extent, Sly Cooper does that. Every time you get a certain number of unlockables in the original one, you get a new little ability, and as you get more and more of them, they get more and more powerful. So by the end of it, you have 18 extra abilities, one of which is to stop time temporarily. So those are really fun to go back through the missions and replay them with all these kind of ridiculous, fun, quirky abilities that you didn't have before. And same thing with, well, I guess it's not quite the same thing for Arkham. Arkham's a different one. That's a story-based one, which makes sense because Arkham's a very story-based game. But anyway, so those are my favorite, I think, in terms of the ones that give you something at the end of it, as opposed to just one that's okay is Jak and Daxter, the original Jak and Daxter, where if you get all of the kind of the primary ones, then you get a secret ending. You get a little bit more lore.
Yeah.
And a sequel hook, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which, that was cool. And think of it a days before YouTube and before the internet, really. That was a huge deal to get to see. Because you'd word of mouth hear, God, I missed this. You'd word of mouth hear that there was something secret. We talked about this with cheats and secrets in the past.
Right.
But that you just hear, something word of mouth around the neighborhood, that there was something else in the game, and you didn't quite know if it was true or not. And then you go through this whole thing, and you get them, and then a new cutscene starts to play, and you're like, oh my god! I turned up really loud on the recording. But anyway, so that's a medium one for me, honestly.
Where you get extra story content, and
stuff
like that.
Yeah, because usually it's just a small thing, because a minuscule amount of people are probably going to do that, right? So you can't actually make it something too important to lock behind it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like just hitting to the end of the credits of a movie.
Right.
It's much more labor intensive. I like you were saying about once you're done with a game, if you collected everything, I think it's fun to reward the player with being able to kind of go out with a bang.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, turn on the God mode, the crazy fire breath. It doesn't really matter at this point. Just let them have some fun. Let them trounce some enemies. They're pretty much done with this game anyway.
You've already completed all the challenges you need. You've proven yourself good enough. You've done everything that the designers have asked from you. So now you can just kind of play in that world.
Well, and it serves an interesting point in So we've talked before about cheats can ruin games pretty quick because they're very carefully tailored sets of rules, and cheats are intentionally violating those rules. And so you have to be very careful about what you let the player do with the cheats because you can ruin the game.
Right.
Well, it's weirdly like the designer ruining the game for the player and just being like, "Yep, you're done."
Yeah.
Like, not only are you done because you collected everything, but like also I'm kind of breaking the game so that you probably don't want to keep going anymore.
That's an interesting point too. That like now you literally have nothing. There's not even a reason to stick around too much. Like I'm gonna finalize that. That's interesting.
I mean, you can just wipe the memory and start again if you're really hardcore into the game, like become a speedrunner or something.
Right.
But like in terms of even challenge, it's sort of like the designer throwing in their hat and just being like, there's no more challenge here. Here, you can kill anything with one click.
Yeah.
In the Spyro instance, where you're a rocket launcher.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And I like the Spyro one too because that one has it didn't come out of nowhere. Like I said, that was an existing, very limited power up that you get to play sometimes, and you only use a few times throughout the game, and would be very, very, like I said, a very small amount of time to get to use it. So you have some semblance of like recognition in your mind that this is a thing, and then it gets blown out of the water. One interesting one I want to talk about real quick was I have so many examples of this. We'll have to keep on moving. Mark, you should keep me honest here, but. Jak 2, which is one of my favorite games of all time. I feel like I say that so much, but Jak 2 is seriously like in the top 5, particularly for its genre. That's a really special game for me. And that was an interesting one in that it didn't have almost any collectibles whatsoever. It had collectibles that had one set of collectibles that had no bearing on the game whatsoever when you played through it the first time. Once you've beaten the game, then you unlocked a new menu in the main menu where you could spend your collectibles that you'd found. And you did spend them. If you had a bank, and if you unlocked something, you'd lose that number permanently to unlock the feature. But there's this list of features. Mark and I just looked over. I refreshed myself. But it went from silly cheats to... Anyway, the interesting thing about... So I have like big head mode, like remove Jack's goatee, which is like a super tiny cosmetic thing that you'd never see because you're behind him anyway. Like that was for like 5 of the items, right?
For the cutscenes mostly.
But so the interesting thing was one of the things, which is now like I feel like close to standard in games, or not even a thing because of YouTube, right? That in game, if you wanted to see, it was completely linear and story based, and once you beat it, you could still kind of go around the open world, but everything was nothing. You couldn't replay anything. But one of the selects, I remember the only reason I did anything in Jak 2 to get, I loved the game, but didn't care for the collectible aspect of it. Because there was here's another thing, this will be a good segue into talking about this, but the way that games help you or don't help you for collectibles, I think makes a huge difference. And collectathons, they're designed for this. I feel like this is less of an issue, but in a game, like I said, with Jak, that is, especially Jak 2, less so than Jak 1. Jak 2 was certainly one more story-based, 2 far more combat-based, and it added a lot of new mechanics that weren't just movement traversal. You introduced guns, you introduced hijacking and vehicles and all that jazz, and racing. But anyway, point is, with Jak 2, the only reason I actually found these collectibles was because one of the unlocks was a level select mode, where you could go back and play any level, any mission, any story mission, whenever you wanted, which for me is like the ultimate thing. Like if you can play the best part of the game whenever you want, that's like ideal. As opposed to in Jak, if you had a specific mission you liked, then you literally had to go back and replay the entire game to get to it.
And then like create a save right before
that
or something?
Yeah, and then not save after it.
Right.
So that was a huge deal that they included that. And so that was the only thing that was like a mid-level thing too, so I got like just as many as I needed to unlock that, and then stopped doing any of the collectibles. So for me it's very much I need a reason to be doing it.
Right.
What was even though I love that game so much. And like I said, that game also gave zero, there's absolutely no direction in game as to where to find these they're just little orbs. Precursor orbs from the first game, actually. But
what was it about those that just weren't that compelling to you? I mean, either just the rewards weren't good enough?
I mean, yeah, I guess.
Combination of that and that they were hard to find?
Like, in terms of the replay, the things that... Again, there were 2 things that were God mode, to unlimited super mode, basically, and then invulnerability. And unlimited ammo. So there were 3 kind of cheats that you could unlock with the precursor orbs. But with those ones, I think, like I said, one, the fact that There was no help given in the game whatsoever. One, it was a gigantic world. It was all open world. And not very easy to get around in. There's no, like, teleportation kind of mechanic. You actually had to, like, go on foot between places. There's no fast travel. There's no way to know when you'd gotten all of them in a given area. So you couldn't even cross off areas from your list having gotten them all. And they weren't challenge-based either. So this is one thing that we'll talk about a little bit too with collectibles. Sometimes, like, again, the Arkham ones are high in my mind, but some of them, of just legit collectibles or trophies, some of them will just be out-of-the-way areas that you have to find, and you get there and you collect it and you leave. And some of them will be out in the open, but will have a challenge attached to them, which is usually a pretty simple, like, 2 to 3 minute gadget-based challenge that you have to work through. And then you unlock it. So it's not finding it. So, but with Jack, none of them were challenge-based. You had to find these way out-of-the-way areas that they were just hidden. I mean, once you found it, you just walked into it and you got it. Right. So they were never hidden behind anything. They were all the exploration, and just exploring without any direction is not compelling to me.
Yeah.
Particularly in games that you see the whole world too. Like, you'd have to go back into these areas. They were well enough hidden that they were in the world, and you played through the area the first time and didn't find them. You know, and the areas are pretty well. You know, you do what you need to do in an area and traverse it pretty well. It's not like it was like you rush through areas. You know,
right.
So I'd already felt like I'd gotten a good sense of the areas already, so I had no reason to go back intrinsically.
Right.
And extrinsically, the reward was, you know, once I got the reward I wanted, I was done.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Well, that's you bring up an interesting point about, like, extrinsically and versus intrinsic rewards for exploration, right? So if you make, like, a very beautiful world and you want people to explore it, adding something to collect is a great way to do that, and it's relatively low burden on the developer to just be like, oh yeah, this item exists at this coordinate in the world. You know, Breath of the Wild does this a little bit. The dungeons in Breath of the Wild are much more complicated than just, you know, dragging and dropping an item. Right. They all have their unique puzzles, but they're sprinkled throughout the world, and they incentivize people to explore this massive open world that they've created. In a way that just they didn't really have enough game to fill, basically. Yeah. Like, if you were to just do the story of Breath of the Wild, you wouldn't end up looking at a lot of the world.
Right, and that feels important. Like I was saying with Jack, you see everything in the world on the first playthrough. Mm-hmm. So you're going back to things as opposed to finding new things.
Right, you're just trying to find, like, some little nook somewhere that you walked by, and like that's not interesting to find.
Exactly.
It's not like, oh, look at this nook. Oh, also there's a collectible.
Yeah, exactly. You know? As opposed to, like you're saying with Breath of the Wild, you're going to places you had not been in the story. You're going out of your way. You're finding new things, environments, and I feel like that's true for a lot of collectathons too proper, where you can get through the story or the game or whatever small narrative there is by getting, like, the required progression items. But it's not like you see the whole game that way. Mm-hmm. In fact, seeing the whole game requires you to be going and seeing other parts.
Yeah.
Like, it could be argued that, again, like with Jack, you saw the whole game almost, and you got all the stuff that was worth getting out of it. Mm-hmm. In terms of both the environments, and like I said, that game's heavily story-based.
Right.
So you're not getting a whole ton of more content, as opposed to a collectathon that is the content. You're getting more of the thing that they're trying to give you. Right. And your first playthrough, or beating the game, quote-unquote, isn't really beating the game, actually. That's just, like, getting you introduced to
all the areas.
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of it, you know.
So, like Mario Sunshine, you can get through that game with way less than all the shines.
Right.
And then you can go back and you can collect them all and 100% it. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're talking about with Jack and Dexter is a great example of it. There's extrinsic without any intrinsic motivation to explore. Right. And that seems like something that you really want to go together in any game where you're collecting something, certainly in, like, a collectathon, but any game where you're asking people to run around and collect something, you want it to be intrinsically rewarding. In other words, they're getting to explore new places, or at least new mechanics and new ideas in the game while they're, like, going around. Mm-hmm. And then and Mario Odyssey is great at this, right? Every level you sort of have, there's a little bit of a different mechanic and a different world and different characters that you're getting to explore.
Right.
And then there's also the extrinsic reward of, like, I'm progressing in the game. Maybe I'm getting more powerful. Maybe I'm unlocking, like, new worlds that I can go to. And so you want those to both align.
Yeah.
I would say if you can get really solid intrinsic rewards, then probably the extrinsic doesn't matter as much, but it would be hard to just get a game where it's like, here's a world, go explore it and collect these things, then the game ends, right? Like you want to give them a little bit more motivation than that. Yeah. I think worse than having no extrinsic motivation is having no intrinsic motivation, which is what you're talking about, where it's like you have to just do this tedious thing of like finding 100 of this random object in these places you don't even want to go to.
Yeah.
So I would say if you have to pick one, pick intrinsic, but you really want to have both.
And it's interesting too because like another level of intrinsic motivation could. I was thinking about this like with precursor orbs in Jak 2. Like I said, those I feel like, and it's been a long time since I played the game, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sure some of them are more what I'm about to say, but most of them were, like I said, nooks and crannies that you were gonna miss and had to find kind of arbitrarily. Now, as opposed to like I was talking about, even with the Arkham ones that are out in the open, I like the idea of like skill checks. So this like with Sly Cooper, the original Sly Cooper, a lot of times in those levels you'd have these collectibles which were bottles, and you had to get to them and break them. And again, like the system of movement in Sly Cooper was so fun, that was the whole game, was the platforming aspect of it. Again, as opposed to Jak 2, where it's less platforming and more vehicle and combat based. Again, that's why the original Jak and Daxter had more collectibles and it worked better, and it had more reason to do that. Anyway, with Sly Cooper, a lot of times those you'd see an item out in the world, and it wasn't clear how to get there. So like you had to do a certain number of things or do a certain like skill check that was hard enough to get up to that area, as opposed to just wandering around aimlessly. Like, hey, here's this thing. Now it's a puzzle. It's knowable. It's confined. I can utilize, or even just like, hey, it's very clear. I have to do this really difficult sequence of jumps, and it's really hard to time that.
Right.
And I just have to practice that. Like that's so much easier for me to get into and to do because I have a clear goal and I have a clear way to accomplish it, or at least there's at least a confined area of thinking where I can accomplish it, right? Which is like, okay, this has got to be gettable some way, and I have all my tools. Like, they wouldn't make something that's ungettable, I can figure this out. Right. As opposed to aimlessly wandering. Yeah. So I like that a lot more, and that brings me to the discussion of games that can... So like Arkham would fail at this were it not for a system in the game which points you towards the collectibles themselves. Like I said, there's some of them that are out in the world, they're just very clear challenges, but there's a lot of them that aren't, or are challenges in hard-to-find areas. And I would not do it if the game didn't have a way to do something repeatedly, which is a skill check, basically. There's informants throughout the world that you identify, just normal thugs. Certain normal thugs will randomly be selected to be informants, and if you defeat everyone else around the thug and leave him till last, you can interrogate him. And when you interrogate them, they'll add 3 or 4 collectibles or locations or solutions to the map. And you can actually lock onto those, and it'll give you a location, a physical 3D location in the world that you can follow. So it's interesting. There's another Spyro 3 actually does this. There's a mini game. You can actually play as the Dragonfly, Sparks. Yeah. There's a bunch of mini games. There's 4 mini games, and that every time you complete one, it gives Sparks a new sub ability basically in the main game. And the third one, the third of the fourth, is you can use him to, you can just hold down all the shoulder buttons and he'll just point at where the nearest gem is. And that's it. So that's an interesting one because that, like, I love that one too because that also doesn't just tell you exactly where it is, and particularly in a game like Spyro, which is about 3-dimensional like movement in space. Now there's still a puzzle for the player to figure out, which is how do I get to this area, or hey, Sparks appears to be pointing just directly into a wall. If there's some roundabout way to get there, I need to figure that out. But you still have at least somewhere to go off of. Something to start off of, and some way to begin utilizing problem solving and the tools that you have. And similarly with the informants, you get locations on the map. Sometimes like they're really simple, where if they were just a kind of out of the way location, then you just automatically get that one because it's on the map. You go to that location, it's there. But if you have verticality to it, or you have again like it appears to be inside of an impassable wall, then there's got to be something else you do around it.
Right.
Or it just simply leads you to that challenge, and then you complete the challenge and whatever it wants you to. So I think being able to have a game signal, give a little bit of help, and the Arkham one's pretty extreme in terms of if you find all the informants, you will get every single thing on the map.
Right, you'll know where everything is.
And that's what I do. That's how I beat that.
Well, and I think I probably would do that too, because I mean, you're talking about the difference between exploring an environment versus sort of exploring a mechanic.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like doing all sorts of crazy jumps or like having a skill check, it's like the designers are asking the player to explore, how you would complete a specific task using the mechanics that they've given you. Which is super, it's interesting, it's compelling, and I would much rather do that because it's much more like problem solving, and I don't know, there's more to figure out. It seems like if you thought about it for a while, you could come to a solution.
Yeah.
Whereas like just wandering around a map, it doesn't matter how long you think about it, like you can be systematic in your searching, but you still have to look everywhere.
Yeah.
And so what you were talking about is a way for the game developers to give you a mechanic to assist in the exploring that you could get better at using. So like the Firefly mechanism is fantastic because, compasses are a real thing, and you can develop real skills with like navigation and trying to figure out where an item is. If you can always point toward that item, you can eventually find it.
Right.
And so it gives you some way to more intelligently, I guess,
problem solve.
do searching. I still think they're sort of in two different categories, though, because in one case,
very much so.
like Mario Odyssey does skill checks all over the place. Like that's most of the game, and I think that's why the game's interesting.
Yeah.
Is because it's not just wander around and see all the cool stuff we made and get sprites.
Right.
It's like no, make sure you can do like a backflip off of your
do
hats
cool things.
and it looks cool to do. It feels cool to do, and then you also get a reward from it.
Right.
And so I'm much more for like the exploring a mechanic in order to get a collectible. But I like the differentiation because you can make the sort of wandering, searching exploration more palatable if you give them some sort of a way to narrow down their search. So it's not just like, here's this massive world, good luck.
And I feel like that became more of an issue as worlds got bigger and bigger, right? In Asylum, actually, you didn't do that. So Asylum didn't have that mechanic. City and Night did, with the Riddler informants. In Asylum, you didn't have that. Actually, there was just one collectible on the map in each area that would then reveal all the other collectibles. So you had no help to find that one, but if you found that one,
you were all set.
Then you were set.
Huh.
And I 100%ed that one too. So that was but again, Asylum was so much smaller, and each individual area was so much smaller. Like that was reasonable to actually search every nook and cranny of one of these areas, because that was actually doable. And again, that was like a task I had to wrap my mind around. So I really think it is just the organization of even breaking into subtasks and subgroups and sub-areas, and the game telling you that really helps with that kind of level. As well as, like I said, with the Asylum one, I just love Batman so much that I'll stick around a Batman game longer. But two, a lot of the other thing that the Asylum games, the Arkham games did well was outside of just the little trophies, they'd actually write riddles. And you had to find something in the world. It was really simple, usually like 2 or 3 line riddle that rhymed. And the answer would be decently obvious if you were a Batman fan. And then you had to find the piece. So a lot of times the piece would be kind of easy to find, but you had to put together what the riddle was. Another really interesting one was, they didn't do this in Night at all. They did it in City and Asylum, but it might be hard to explain, but you basically had to get to the idea was to get you to a certain vantage point, a really, really select location. And what you had to do is that there would be a painted green question mark in the world somehow. The problem was it would be split across different things. So you had to get to a location where you could line up like perspective correctly, so that all of the objects would line up and make a question mark, and get the dot in. So like if it was split across like 3 things, you could have like a pillar, and it would be on the street, and you'd have to get up high and line up like a lamppost that had a green dot on it at the end of the question mark to make sure that it would form a full question mark. Or even the question mark itself could be in different pieces, and you'd have to utilize perspective to get it together. So that's an interesting one in that that's like a legit puzzle. That's like like the solution, quote unquote, is getting Batman to a certain spot in 3 dimensions, right?
Right.
And then being able to move the camera a little bit, but the camera's limited. If you're in the right spot, you'll be able to find it.
Right.
So that's a fascinating one again in terms of it's really easy to find those. Like you'd see like weird like green, seemingly random things in random spots, so you know that's one of the question mark riddles, and that in this area there's more of them, and you can put them together.
That's brilliant. I love
so it'll be hidden in plain sight a lot, and but it would take work to figure out and solve it.
Yeah, no, I love the way that like suggests, hey, there's a puzzle here.
Yeah.
And again, it kind of gives you some direction because like obviously, if you see a green pillar, in order
it has to be on this.
It has to be in view, right?
Yeah,
like you can't go anywhere where that pillar is out of line of sight. Otherwise, that can't be part of the question mark. And so it narrows down the scope of where you have to look. And so,
Sorry, I just distracted Mark off screen. I did want to ask you about. Did you have something else?
No, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you about Hat in Time, and it's one of my least favorite things about the Arkham games, and they rectified this a little bit by if you find a trophy that you can't get to, then you can scan it and it'll automatically add it to your map permanently.
Oh, interesting.
So that's interesting. But the thing I don't like is when you're playing through a game and you see collectibles that you can't get just because you don't have a gadget or an ability that you'll get later in the game. So then you have to backtrack, and then it's really simple to use it. Like, it's literally you just use that gadget and then you grab the thing.
Sure.
But I've always disliked that mechanic where there is something very clear in game that you can't do until you get something that you can't have gotten yet.
Right.
And then you have to... But, like, I don't know, is that unfair? I'm trying to think if there's games where that doesn't happen. Like, but yeah, the old collectathons, you didn't really get a whole lot of abilities, right?
Yeah, I mean,
like,
if you go pretty far back, yeah.
Well, but even like
Mario
Spyro or
64,
Jack, and there wouldn't be a whole lot of problems that you couldn't solve. Like, you didn't get a whole lot. I guess you got new weapons, but I love games that like you have a full toolkit. It just would be really hard.
Mm-hmm. Like you could do it in theory.
Yeah, but it would be really, really difficult.
Well, if you were going to ask if they do that in Hat in Time...
but have you run into that another, or what do you think about that? Just kind of...
Well...
Maybe it's unavoidable. I don't know.
It does happen in Hat in Time. Like, there are definitely these exploding crates. Well, I don't know if they're exploding, but they're crates, and they're sort of wrapped in this, like, glowing tape, and they're shiny, and they're very attention-catching.
Yeah.
But you can't do anything with them right off the bat.
Right.
I'm reminded of that, and like Paper Mario, there's always a ton of things that you're just like, there's this big block that I can't break yet because I don't have like the super hammer, so I can't get through this level. I would much prefer that style of like, it's a gate to a new area than just like, oh, there's a box here, sometime I'll come back, open it, and get whatever's inside.
Yeah.
Like, for me, that's not very a compelling reason to like have to revisit all the levels and like find all the boxes just to break them open and get their contents.
Right.
I would much rather like break open a box and like underneath it there's a tunnel and then I go to a new world.
Right, because the thing about getting a new gadget is you've gotten the new gadget and you probably learned how to use the new gadget, so then it's not interesting anymore. If you go back and just use the gadget, if that's the whole thing, you did that back when you got the gadget in the main game.
Exactly.
So that's no longer interesting at all. But if you have to go back and utilize, and this was true also in Arkham, sometimes there'd be times where it'd be a puzzle that required multiple gadgets to use. And you have to use them intelligently, and those ones I didn't mind as much. But you're right, if it was just come back, use this thing that you'll get later. And like I don't mind gadgets as progression either. Like that works fine.
Yeah. But it's not a very interesting mechanic. It's like, this gadget opens boxes. Your goal is to go find boxes and open them.
Right, exactly.
It's not a very interesting, there's no puzzle to that. It's just find box, open box with my box opener.
So it seems like there's some level of particular, I feel like we've been talking to in terms of like during the game and after the game. That seems to be more, like I said, collectathons as a way to make a game longer, as opposed to like the main game, quote unquote, being like, I'm thinking again like my action games, so like Jack and Daxter, Darksiders, the Jack 2 and 3, Darksiders, Arkham, God of War. Those ones you go back after the game, you play through the game, and then you go back and really do the puzzles and collectibles. Sure. Sometimes because you really have to. But a true collectathon, like we said, is kind of that thing in and of itself.
Yeah, that is the whole game, is just collecting
and
something.
then doing it more so after the end of the game. So, like, how does Hat in Time... Have you finished Hat in Time?
I haven't finished Hat in Time.
Okay, you haven't finished it yet. Like, not the main, like... Because, like, we were talking even before the cast, like, the main quote-unquote, like, story. Like, you're mentioning... this is a good point. Like, Nintendo is very... This is probably why I don't like Nintendo games as much, is because they're not very narrative-driven.
No, they're very much not.
And I love narrative. And, But Nintendo games don't struggle with this. Like, even like the beating the game in Nintendo games, like what does that even mean? Like beating the story? There's not much of a story. Like finishing all of the levels the first time, I guess.
Yeah,
but that's really like half the game, right?
Yeah.
Like I mean maybe some people do, but like probably few people would stop upon beating the game.
Sure.
For a really good Nintendo game, and I think that's how they're designed, right?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely much more mechanic driven and like. You know, Nintendo has definitely gone on record saying that, you know, the way that the game plays is central to how they make the game. They start with how the game plays, and then they just build a world around it, and then, you know, I don't know if what comes first, the story or the world. It probably depends on the game. If it's something like Yoshi's Woolly World, it's probably the world. So, like, the play comes first, then the world, then the story comes third.
Right, yeah.
And so, like, it's much more about, this feels good to play, and so it's not necessarily about, like, oh, I got to the end of the level, so I saw the whole story, so I'm done.
Right.
It's like, no, the thing that was compelling you to play this game was that it was just fun to do.
Yeah.
It's like, kind of like it's, fun to, I don't know, dribble a basketball around or play with a hacky sack.
Right.
You don't do that just to win. You do it because you enjoy it.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. That's not or when you finish a game of soccer, you don't end it because like you finish like. You have a time limit to it, but like you don't stop. You're not like I'm done with soccer. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Soccer. Like I've got it now. Like that's not the point. Like you go back and do the thing again because it's fun to do, which is how those games work. I wanted to talk about again Hat in Time because Xander loved that game or loves that game and played that while we were living together actually, so I got to see a little bit of it there. But I just know that it's supposed to be absolutely fantastic, and like I said, kind of some of my early roots in terms of like Spyro. I actually did want to talk a little bit about Crash Bandicoot and the way Crash does collections, because that's not a true collectathon. I think that's a true platformer. I feel like platformers collectathons overlap a little bit.
Yeah.
But Crash is like a legit platformer, I feel like, where the whole point of a level is to get from point A to point B and not die.
Yeah, much more in the spirit of like the original Super Mario games.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. As opposed to like Spyro, like the later Spyro games is you have. And especially, I think another big thing with platformers is like one-hit kills, right? Like the idea is to avoid damage entirely, as opposed to having health. That begins to make it a little bit more like an action game, a little bit. Anyway, point is, I want to hear about Hat of Time with another thing we were talking about with good collectibles is, for me, again, being so narrative and story-driven. I love when collectibles have a reason. If you can kind of role-play as the character, they would actually have a reason to be getting these collectibles.
Right.
As opposed to just really metagaming and taking you out of it and being like, there's no reason this character would ever do this, but it's part of the game, so I'm going to do it.
Right.
That's one thing I like a little bit. Again, I can talk about the Arkham games at length, but they do a decent job of that, particularly as the games go on in the series, to explain why Batman would ever actually be searching out these trophies that have no value to him.
Yeah. Well,
spoilers to save hostages, but you said Hat of Time does this pretty well.
They do, yeah, actually, and that was when we were talking about this. Like, jumped out at me originally, immediately. So in Hat in Time, the premise of the game is that some person floats up to your spaceship that you have near a planet and opens the door, and opening doors in space is not good. So you basically. Yeah, you breach the airlock in the ship, and everything gets sucked out into space, and that includes the little time machines little hourglasses that, from what I can tell, power your ship. And so you are going around this planet, right? So all these hourglasses obviously fall into the nearest gravity well, which is this planet that you're right outside of.
And it's an ocean planet, and it's Subnautica, and now you're playing Subnautica, and you're underwater.
No, but that's true. That's kind of a similar premise. But anyway, no, in this case, you were collecting the little hourglasses, and you have to run around and collect them all in order to power your ship. Pikmin actually has a very similar premise in that your spaceship falls apart on this exotic planet. You have to run around and collect the pieces of your ship so you can go home. And so in that way, it makes a lot of sense that the character in Hat in Time is looking for all these hourglasses. And it makes sense that Olimar is looking for the pieces of his ship. Like, they've made the collectathon also a narrative piece.
Right. It's because that's all it is.
Right.
I was going to say, again, going back to more narrative games, needing to justify having collectibles. Collectathons don't really, I was just thinking about the other collectathons that I enjoyed. They're really simple. They're not hard to do.
No.
Like I said, explaining why Batman would go do this, or why Kratos would go out of his way to look around the world and find stuff, is a lot harder than, say, like in Spyro is a really simple one with, in Spyro 3, all of the baby dragon eggs have been kidnapped, and that's the whole game, is finding them.
Right.
That needs no more explanation. And then in terms of the progression, they're innately magical, dragon eggs are, and to get to the next area you need a little bit more magic. And so if you get enough dragon eggs, then you can have enough magic to go on to the next place to find more dragon eggs. And that's it. That's all we need. For Spyro, or for Crash Bandicoot, is even simpler, I think. Literally, there's crystals at the end of every level. So you get to the end of it, you get a crystal. And the crystals are powerful, and there's a bad guy who wants the crystals to power a bad thing.
Right.
And you're finding them before he does. And that's it. And that's actually entirely... Because those games don't have almost any narrative, right?
But it's very internally consistent.
Yeah,
it's not like, why is Crash doing this?
No, not at all.
The whole story is explaining why Crash is doing this.
There's some stakes to it, but they're very simple stakes because it's a simple narrative. And that actually works. That's not a bad thing. Simple isn't bad inherently at all.
No.
And similarly with, all these other things that has collectible as just a reason for existing, that works well. It's the games that aren't like entirely collectibles with a collect. I think that's what I don't like. If a game isn't a collectathon and tries to make me collect things, it better give me a darn good reason, both intrinsically in the game, like the game mechanically to have me to do it, as well as the character.
Right.
Like I said, I'm playing that game for a story reason. And if I don't have a reason to do something, if I don't have a reason to do it in the story, then I'm not going to do it.
Right, and it just feels...
And it feels bad.
It feels intrusive, and like you said, artificial when we were talking.
Yeah,
like,
really contrived.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, you're Batman, also like collect like 100 of these things just because...
Yeah,
you know.
like it's so not Batman-y. But if you... What they do in... I think the best version of the in-game version of this is Arkham City, where Riddler has kidnapped 9 or 10 hostages, and he'll hold them in different locations, and he'll give you the necessary pieces of the puzzle to figure out where each hostage is if you solve a certain amount of riddles. So that's the incentive you need. So suddenly, going around, there's a life at stake, and then there's also a tiny level of there's a tiny level of completion that you get every time you solve enough riddles. Then you get this cool puzzle room, which are a lot more fun than the riddles themselves, and then you save a person. And even in the game, it feels a little bit better. You've earned something with these puzzles, then you do it again.
Right, and that's like narratively driven. Like you're being a hero, you're saving these people by solving these puzzles.
Right, and at the end you catch Riddler, and you've put him away.
Right.
So that works well, as opposed to in the first game, in Arkham Asylum, you don't even see Riddler, he's not even on the map at all, he's just taunting you via having hacked into your comms. And as you find all of these, the more you find his riddles, the more he talks to you, and as he's talking to you, you're tracing his call. And when you find the last riddle, he's talked long enough that you don't even get to do it, you just hear police sirens in the background, and he comes and gets taken away. So that one, you get nothing intrinsic or extrinsic as you're collecting the riddles, other than hearing him talk. And then 2, at the end of it, you don't really have any level of agency in the game. It's just you've gotten, and there's nothing to keep you going throughout the whole process too.
Right.
Like I said, that one's slightly made easier due to the fact that it was smaller, and it was broken down pretty well, and there was a very clear list of collectibles that you could find. That's the other thing. I love having a list of how many are in an area.
Sure.
Just so I know I can be done with an area if I've gotten all of them, or how many I have left is psychologically important.
Right. Well, and it's just another tool to help narrow the scope. Like you said, in a big world, you want to give the player tools to understand the scope of their task and point them in the right direction. So if I know that there's nothing left in this level, I get a green check on this level or whatever. I don't have to go back there, and that's super handy to know. Okay, this massive world has been kind of cut into pieces now for me.
So why did collectathons fall out of vogue?
Well, that's a good question.
We were thinking about it, most AAA games, maybe not most, a lot of AAA games were highly respected, and they were collectathons basically.
A lot of them were collectathons or platformers.
And that's definitely not the case anymore.
No, well, and it made me wonder what we were talking about is why collectathons work as a genre.
Yeah,
and I think it's just true that people like collecting things.
That is true. That's a very, very basic evolutionary thing, that hoarding food was good.
Yeah, and
finding colorful, pretty fruits would result in life.
It lends itself a lot more to exploration, either, like I said, of a mechanic or of a level.
Right.
And so I think that they're a little less cinematic. You have to invest less in writing, less in cutscenes. There are certain areas where you really don't have to invest much in order to do a collectathon, and you can sort of make them arbitrarily long, as long as you can give the more space to do the collection, I guess.
More reason to do it. Yeah.
So I'm not really sure why they fell out of vogue. They seem fun. It's maybe the intrinsic motivation got harder and harder to come by. Just you can give somebody an interesting world to play around with, and I think Mario Odyssey is a great modern collectible that obviously did pretty well. But outside of Nintendo, which has kind of always done a bit more collectathons than any other studio, there aren't too many other people doing those. And I don't know. I'm hard pressed to come up with why they disappeared. Maybe they had been done a lot, and there was a huge move toward more narratively focused games in the last decade.
Well, that's what I was thinking, and was that contrast that to the Activision style Assassin's Creed, Arkham, Shadows of Mordor, or Shadows of War games, where they've gotten replaced by side quests basically. As opposed to just a tacked on extra thing to do with a little bit of narrative. I feel like there's some potential. We talked about this in our big 2D to 3D, but when 3D became a thing, suddenly platformers blew open. because now you have a whole other dimension, literally, of space to explore, and learning how to give the player control in that area was like the thing for gamers to do for like a while there, and that was great. But now that we've figured that out in large part, that has to be replaced by something else. So I feel like that level of collectathon kind of got tacked on to other games, as opposed to just being the game by itself. And like I said, and I think eventually that turned into. So then necessarily those had to be like kind of story-based or narrative-driven in some way. So then the collectathon had to be kind of story-based, which that's just like side quests.
Right.
So think about like Red Dead, think about, I mean, even big RPGs, Skyrim, you know, like those, you collect side quests almost as opposed to items. You complete activities and things, and even if they are repetitive, sometimes they are just collecting an item, sometimes they are, you know, like a type of mission, like an escort mission or something like that.
Escort mission.
And yeah, exactly. We all love those. But like that, I feel like that's what functionally replaced that gaming space.
Yeah,
was like side missions in single-player games.
But it's ironic because people sort of notoriously don't love side quests.
Exactly.
Where it's just
no one
like,
likes those, right?
Go kill 10 chickens, or like go collect 10 letters from random parts in town. Like those aren't seen as like the exciting parts of the game most of the
tedious,
time. And I think the reason is a lot of what we're talking about. Like they kind of ripped the soul out of a collectathon and just like took the form and pasted it onto these very narratively driven games where there isn't too much justification for the character to even be doing what they're doing,
or just have good systems for getting places.
There's the maybe little to no hinting system. The mechanics in order to collect the things that you use aren't very interesting. Or maybe sometimes they're like a tutorial. I remember one of the Assassin's Creed games, you like run around and collect a bunch of letters, and that's
I remember
the tutorial because you like learning the mechanics on how to move around. But like it wasn't very interesting, and it wasn't the reason that you play Assassin's Creed.
Right. I remember the only Assassin's Creed I've played even a little bit was I played Black Flag a little bit, and it was beautiful and it was cool in a lot of ways. But one of the little side quests is literally it's supposed to be like a chase sort of thing, but it was a letter on the wind that you needed like some information from, and you literally had to chase it around, and it would leave like a glowy trail behind it. So it was kind of like a chase quest.
Right.
But like that's so non-interesting when like the main thing is about this ancient. You know, you're a pirate. You have a pirate ship. You're murdering people. It's this ancient rivalry, and then you're like jumping from roof to roof trying to grab a piece of paper.
Right.
Like that's so. It was never horribly engaging, right?
Well, no, and it's like so you marketed this game to a specific demographic, probably not the same people who you would market a game like Super Mario Odyssey, right? Like games that are more about a collectathon. Instead, you decided you like played up that you're like this badass assassin that could be anywhere and do anything, and like. Could disguise themselves as like a priest and walk through and then stab somebody. Like that was what was in the trailer, and like that was so cool. And then like you're doing that and you have like to collect a letter or to just escort a person from place to place. Like you've totally violated the expectations of the player, and you've also marketed to the wrong group of people because you took collectathons and you put it in a completely different game.
Completely misunderstood what made those compelling.
Right, and the sort of person that you've attracted to play that game. Like, there's a market for people to play Assassin's Creed as an assassin, not as a collectathon.
Right.
And so tacking it on is just sort of it's extremely artificial, but it also might make the player feel like they're supposed to be doing something that they really don't need to be doing.
And the other thing too is that like it was doubling down on something they didn't need. So the traversal was fun by itself, and I used it to get around from mission to mission. I had to get good at it, and I had to do, and even in the missions it required me to do it. So in terms of what it was testing, which was my ability to get around, that was tested sufficiently with better justification and naturally in the game itself. So that was like you can check that box in terms of what was interesting to me as a gamer.
Right.
So now trying to make me do that again, like I know I've already gotten traversal, and obviously this is more advanced traversal, I guess, but it's so contrived and artificial that I already got my kick in terms of feeling like I can jump and find areas, as well as like in chase missions or in terms of certain story missions where if you're not good enough at that, you will like fail a mission. Like that is a reason to learn how to traverse well.
Right.
And again, like I guess you could make the argument that's like more content for players that really want to push it, but it's like such a low-brow version of that.
Yeah.
Such a slightly cheap. And again, I don't want to sound too hateful here in terms of game devs have a pretty ridiculous task on hand, I think, in terms of expectations on them, but at the same time, just again, if we're going to talk about in terms of design, giving you a kind of tacked on experience to something you've already even done well. That's why I was thinking, like, even in the Arkham games, traversal is such a part of the game, so why isn't traversing around to find the riddles fun? Well, it's because you spend so much of the game traversing already, and you've already mastered traversal, and traversal, you don't need a whole lot more reason to keep on doing that. In fact, it's even fun to even not look for things to traverse, to just fly around the world and then, like, attack random mooks, or, like, chase down a car or something. Like, I've done that just for fun.
It's the mechanical equivalent to the Jack and Daxter scenario where, like, you had been to all these places, why do I need to go back?
Yeah.
And mechanically, it's like, okay, I know how to use a grapple hook, why do I have this puzzle where it's like, it's just about grapple hooking? Like, I know how to do that.
Yeah,
it's just tedious.
You got your satisfaction of that through the game, the way it was designed, and it was played.
Right, which is great. Like, that should be a pat on the back for the game devs.
Right.
But then, yeah, you don't need to tack on this extra system to make you do that even more.
Yeah. Can we talk about Crash real quick?
Sure.
Okay. Another weird little kind of side, two things. One, the way that, again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in terms of the differentiation between games that are true collectibles or collectathons versus, so this isn't, Crash Bandicoot has an interesting place in this because I would actually describe this as more of a true platformer than a collectathon. Like we said, like literally just getting from the beginning of the level to the end without dying is the point of the whole game.
Right. And you can beat the game just doing that.
Yep, and that is, the story is all contained within that. Maybe you'll have like a little secret extra ending at the end if you get all the other collectibles. But anyway, the interesting thing about Crash was that the collectibles, so there were fruit, there were Wumpa fruit, they look like apples, and those would just sit out in the game, or they'd be in boxes. And if you break a box, you get some fruit, or you just collect the fruit if you run into them. And what those were if you got 100 of them, you got a new life, an extra life. And that was back in the days when you had lives. That's like such an interesting currency of gaming currency.
It's been very much done away with.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. But like I said, the whole point was if you get to the end of the level, then that was the whole point. So literally the only currency you have to spend is getting hit, which is a life. Anyway, the point is, the way that the collectible in the Crash games was not getting all the fruit. It was just breaking all of the boxes in the game. In the level, rather. Which was a really interesting way to do that because, like I said, normally you would see collecting everything. It wasn't, you have to get all the apples. Because those were currency for lives. Those were health, kind of, basically. Those were binary health, where you didn't get anything until you got all of them. It wasn't scaling. But once you got 100, you got a full new life. But the boxes, like I said, sometimes the boxes would give, sometimes it would be different types of boxes to break. Sometimes you'd have to go out of your way to break a box in a certain way. Like, you couldn't get to it to jump on it. You'd have to, like, destroy some TNT that would explode and hit another box. Or chain TNT, that was another thing. Also, the other really hard one was that there were certain boxes that were fatal. Like, there was TNT that you would touch. It would start a 3-second countdown, and then it would explode. Then there were nitro boxes, which were green. And if you touch those, they explode and you die.
Right.
And part of, like I said, you have to destroy all boxes. So sometimes you would have to get really creative with ways to destroy these boxes.
Yeah.
So again, like it was both traversal as well as the only other kind of mechanic was breaking things. That was it. And that was the true kind of collectible version. If you got all the boxes, then you got another, a gem, basically, to put that forward, to put that towards. And if you got all of the gems in the game, then I think you would usually get an Easter egg kind of secret ending or something like that.
And that's an interesting way of, like, using an achievement in order to motivate, like, a certain behavior from players. Like, it's cool because you can embed a bunch of puzzles in a level, but not actually make the player do them until they want to come back and, like, finish that collectathon.
Yeah.
Or if you want to call it, like, a collection.
Right.
It is an achievement, and it has a decent, I would say it has a decent intrinsic motivation to, like, go back, destroy the boxes, and figure out, like, the different puzzles and different ways to do it, and you present the player with different challenges. It's interesting mechanically. It's not just like, go find all the boxes and destroy them. It's like, no, some of these boxes are in really weird spots where you can't really figure out how to destroy them.
Right. Or and there's the other thing, right? They're almost always visible. Almost never I could remember in a Crash game where you have to find a hidden box. Another one that would be, this was annoying, sometimes they would have outlines of boxes that you can interact with, and you had to find another box later that would you'd activate it, and then they would, like, materialize.
Or you should come back and destroy it.
So that wasn't just about backtracking. Sometimes that was about finding a different thing and then finding a way to get back. So again, that's all just more like that one. I would do some of those. Those ones I wouldn't ignore entirely. I don't think I ever 100. Oh no, I did. 100%. It was 100. Remember back in the day when, like,
they did more.
The percentage 100%. Was oddly arbitrary.
Yeah.
You beat a game, like the story would end at like 80%.
You're
like, what? But then, like, if you beat everything, it was. I remember for Crash 3, it was 117. if you got to under 17, that was actually 100%.
They just had fun with it.
So strangely arbitrary.
Yeah, and that thankfully went away because of the internet, but I think it added some intrigue of like, it's more than 100%.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I do want to mention before, we're almost out of time.
No, go for it.
But about Hat in Time, and the very first thing that they give you, the first hat, so each hat that they give you has a different power in this game. The first hat that they give you, the special power is that it points you toward your next goal, which I think is just a really cool thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really help necessarily with the collectathon portion of it.
Right.
I mean, it does like you're collecting the progression collectibles, like the hourglasses. It will point you toward those.
Right.
But I just think that it's helpful in giving you direction, and that like in a collectathon. Yeah, I don't know. It's just helpful to give players direction early on. Maybe that doesn't really have much to do with the collectibles, but I just appreciate it as a player. Like,
well, it's very.
I can as I get more familiar with the game, I can put on different hats, and I don't have to have that hat on. But I can always fall back on this very first hat I got, which will point me in a direction.
I like that, making that mutually exclusive too, in some ways, to make it a choice and a sacrifice and something that you have to decide upon, and that isn't just a default you're always going to have on.
Right.
That actually makes that interesting. I mean, the other thing is like, I think it goes back to. It's most obvious with collectathons because you're trying to find spaces in 3 dimensions, get the coordinates, but it kind of just goes back to what we've talked about before in terms of the having direction in game, having it not leaving. Like, there is a level of obviously open worldness and freedom that is highly desired by gamers, and a lot of buzzwords kind of go around that. But having a really clear level of structure to your game is really important. Having enough having limits, having boundaries, having enough tools to complete something as opposed to being dropped into a gigantic, overwhelming thing. That is not, and that's why tutorials exist, which is like kind of, those tend to be a little bit. Is there a tutorial in?
There's not. It's actually
super
super minimal tutorial.
Yeah.
No, it's like you pretty much jump right into it, but it's such a gentle introduction that it works pretty well.
Yeah, and that's, I feel like, is ideal by far, having a good kind of central way to teach something outside of the really contrived tutorial experience where it's like press A to do that, that sort of thing. Anyway, all that is to say, having structure and direction given to a player isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. Actually, that can be a very good thing. Now, that also can give rise to the just following an arrow to your next thing and kind of being a really linear theme park sort of experience, which that's no good either.
Right.
So it is a balance, but I feel like the answer isn't just to be like give no sense of
direction.
Yeah, or help. Like, it's okay to have that, especially if it's earnable help. That's what I like the most.
Yeah.
Which is, like you said, you unlock those sort of things, or you do a thing and then that's moderately hard, and then you can do the thing that feels impossible, and now it's just moderately hard again.
Right.
Because you did something already.
Because of the progression.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to just wrap up with some do's and don'ts, I guess, of collectibles, if we are informed enough to make such a recommendation. I would say do keep making collectibles, because I like collectibles, collectathons. I do think that they work better when either they're the central focus of the game, or you have good intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, and hopefully narrative motivation for the collectible. So
feels good to get it, you're getting a reward for it, and it makes sense why you would do it.
Exactly.
That's a high standard. Yeah, for me, it would be just for my action games out there, give a good, compelling reason to want to be doing the collectible thing. Make it
interesting.
Yeah, make it big enough to feel like a collectible thing that you have to spend a little bit of time on, but not too labyrinth where it's going to be a whole other game by itself. And then really, as best you can, try to fit the existing mechanics of the game that you have already mastered as a player and put them into that, into the collectible thing. The closer you can get to that, I feel like the better it'll feel to engage on those collectathons in an action game. So games like I said, God of War, I've 100%ed and gone around and found everything. Those are also, having some level of linearity. God of War games aren't necessarily open world. They're far more linear. You can go to different places and then backtrack, and it'll always be the same. So there's very limited amount of things that you can find. Also, there's something we didn't talk about too that I like. God of War actually does do this. Oversaturate a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So to unlock everything, quote unquote, or get all of the upgrades, especially if it's an action game, then give 10% more opportunities than it would take to complete it out there, so you can miss a couple. and still get the gameplay centric kind of upgrades
Right.
that you can get. God of War does that.
So yeah, I think oversaturating is a good idea for collectibles, especially if you're going to gate content behind the collectible.
Yeah.
Don't beat a mechanic or an area to death.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about beating a mechanic to death a little bit in some of the Arkham games, and beating an area to death in Jack. I've heard some complaints from Breath of the Wild that they kind of beat the mechanics to death by the end of the 120th shrine. It gets a little old. So limit the amount of collectibles that you're going to put in a game, because it's only interesting for so long. Like, you've only given the player so many tools. Using them is only fun for so long, so try to respect that as a designer.
Yep.
And yeah, as always, try new things and see what works. But I would say those are our main findings for discussing this. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I hope, I do, like I said, they do have kind of a well done, like I said, I have kind of a niche version of what I enjoy for collectathons, but when I get into them, I really get into them, and I really, really love them. And so, yeah, going back and replaying older PS1, PS2 era games that have those kind of more built-in or are kind of more the point, I absolutely adore. And I think it's really cool that someone did Hat in Time as a modern version of those things, just kind of specialized and probably some quality of life improvements and really kind of condensed and polished. I love stuff like that. So, and I think some of the top AAA games that have done that well are included in that, like the new God of War, the Spider-Man, PS4 version, are just off the top of my head. Have collectible parts of them that people have not complained about all the time. So,
yeah. Okay, well, we're actually going to probably take a minute here, and we might stream some Hat in Time. But we argued that our next random game that was picked was actually Super Mario Galaxy 2, which has a major collection component to it. So we're going to get to be able to analyze that game and play it this week. We actually haven't decided on a time yet, so stay posted for that. Obviously, it's Thanksgiving week for those in the U.S. Hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving.
Turkey Day.
I will leave you with this question, which we will not attempt to answer, but it's an exercise for the reader. Are collectathons inherently less replayable because you already collected everything after you finish it? Anyway.
That's a good question.
It is.
All right, folks.
Feel free to reach out to us. You can email Muxl at gergenmuxl.com or gerg at gergenmuxl.com. That will go to Mark and Greg, respectively. And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.